Philanthropy always has been something I've seen my father give time to.
Philanthropy is an old rich person with a foundation who throws a fundraiser gala. Like that's what I thought of it until I came into the room with some of these people.
Young people are actually interested in giving in philanthropy, and I think a lot of them just are looking for that forum to engage.
I feel there's a slight emphasis on participation rather than prescription when it comes to women.
Philanthropy also gives us so much opportunity to support these organizations that are taking these big risky bets that can literally transform the country.
Increasingly, we're seeing the evidence, right, that how women are shaping now, not just how much is given, but also in the way that philanthropy is practiced. It became very clear to me that I want to contribute in ways that feel tangible and meaningful, but also in ways that feel good, like warm altruism. So I think that balance for me is really important.
So if I'm funding an organization, what is the return that I'm going to get on that investment in terms of impact?
The ability and the responsibility always exists. It's just up to us when we decide to act on it. Setika, Sanchi and Surabhi, thank you so much for joining us this evening. As we approach International Women's Day, this conversation is especially meaningful. At AIP, we speak about giving more, giving sooner, giving better, and how India's wealth has grown dramatically over the last 3 decades. But alongside that, how giving must grow and ramp up too, not just in terms of volume, but also in intention, clarity, and impact. One belief we are especially interested in challenging at AIP is the idea that philanthropy is something that has to wait. Wait for a particular age, stage in life, wait until, one steps away from career, from family responsibilities, etc. But through AIP's NextGen program, what we've been asking is a different question. What happens if you start earlier? And all three of you have been an integral part of our inaugural Next Gen program. Setika as a mentor, Surabhi and Sanchi as part of the inaugural cohort, and Sanchi, of course, you've been instrumental in helping us architect the program also. And all of you are thinking deeply about responsibility, influence, and what thoughtful giving really looks like. So I'll invite each of you to briefly introduce yourself, and maybe in that introduction, if you could throw in a sentence about, what draws you personally towards philanthropy. Setika, if I may, request you to start.
Hi, I'm Setika. I'm the executive director at Takshila Foundation and at Shila. So my work basically lies in the intersection of education, arts, and community development. There's always been like a strong focus on sustainable livelihoods. At Takshila Foundation, we're working on integrated rural development through a holistic and a heuristic approach. So the work spans across women's empowerment, education, community theater, community sports, and livelihoods. And at Archila, our multi-art centers basically aim to connect people meaningfully to the arts, and that's through exhibitions, cinema, books, performances, and shared cultural spaces. While also working at Takshila Foundation and Parivartan, which is our center in Sivan in Bihar, in very interiors of Bihar. I also engaged with women and which led me to found Sabrangi, which is a handloom initiative that's dedicated to nurture first generation women weavers and kind of to build dignified and sustainable livelihoods through craft traditions. So that's a little bit about me and my work.
Thanks, Setika. Surabhi? So I'm a research fellow at Vidhi, and what I do is that I help various governments and ministries with legislative drafting, so which in more layman terms means writing the law. So I'm very subject agnostic. I work with a bunch of ministries, but I do have a lot of gender justice based projects, especially closer to my heart. So some of the issues we've looked at more recently would be NRI marital abandonment, which happens a lot in Punjab, and how to solve for it from law, for example. But I also look at like MSME empowerment. So it's really varied that way, I would say.
And I'm also a fellow in the AIP NextGen program. And in terms of just the causes I'm interested in, I would say gender justice, as I said, is a big one. Access to justice from a legal perspective as well. And generally, how to advocate for smaller players in uneven fields, I would say.
Thanks, Surabhi. Sanchi.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Radhika. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanchi. I work in strategy and investments at the Convergence Foundation. At Convergence, our big goal or our North Star is to improve the standard of living for every single Indian through rapid and sustained economic growth. So, what I spend a lot of my time working on is finding great finding great founders, looking at theses in the space of economic development, in the space of human capital development, and then really building out this work through a portfolio of organizations. And we're now up to 25 plus organizations that work on a variety of areas from education to skilling to employability, getting more women into the labor force. So that's what I've spent the last few years on. And in terms of what has got me interested in philanthropy, I think it's really just how I grew up. My parents have always, in their own way, been giving back to society, whether that means tutoring students from the neighborhood or packing food for school kids. And so it's just been something that has been very much ingrained in me. And now I feel fortunate to be able to do it in a much more systemic way.
Thanks, Sanchi. That's a great segue because I was
Yeah.
going to begin the conversation with asking all of you what your early exposure to giving, have been, whether at home, school, and the communities around you, and how that has shaped how you think about philanthropy today. Sanchi, thanks for that. Just curious, since you mentioned that you've always seen that in the way that it was done at home through your parents. And now, over the last couple of years, as you worked at the Convergent Foundation and through the exposure over here, how has that influenced your thinking about do you see that difference between giving or charity and philanthropy?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So, definitely what I grew up with was more on the charity side of things. So, while there was a lot of kindness and it was almost like a responsible way to live, by using the privilege that we've grown up with to work on making lives for all better. I think now that I've moved to Convergence, I've been able to think about philanthropy in a much more systemic way, right? So, for example, earlier, um, when I was growing up, the way that we would give was my parents would get a message from friends that were starting initiatives, or there was a cause that was very heartfelt, like sponsoring a child, or someone had a health issue. And then that's when we would say, let's do some philanthropy. Versus now, when I look at now that I've worked at TCF, I've understood just how powerful domestic philanthropy is. Out of all the different sources, you have CSR and foundations, nothing empowers organizations to do the kind of work that individuals funding you, and individuals funding you over a long period of time can help you do. And so now the way that I think about philanthropy is much more, I would say, with an investor lens, right? So if I'm funding an organization, what is the return that I'm going to get on that investment in terms of impact? So is this organization working in a way that can be scaled? Is this organization working with the government, or has a technology aspect to it, where instead of affecting the lives of maybe those 2 or 3 children that we were sponsoring, we can now do this for thousands of kids at scale, right?
Thanks, Sanchi. Setika, I know that your influence have been began very very early on to your grandfather, and then with Sanjeev ji.
No,
Talk to us a
absolutely.
little bit about those early exposures, how it's influenced, and how you've also brought in a new or perhaps a different lens to the work that that was already happening in Takshila.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, the earliest exposure, to giving was through my grandfather and my father. Um, uh, I've spent all my summer breaks going back to my village in Bihar, and I've witnessed the journey even before Parivartan, where giving was in the form of supporting the hospital in the village or the post office or building a primary healthcare center to the conceptualization of Parivartan, which is within Takshila Foundation, and how it was first thought to be an ITI, and eventually moved towards a more evolving and broader model of rural development. So watching that entire process unfold also shaped my understanding of philanthropy as something that was deeply rooted in commitment, patience, and community engagement. So philanthropy always has been something I've seen my father give time to. That's how I've understood philanthropy, not about financial support, that's extremely important, but also about investing time, listening carefully, understanding the local context and the local realities, and then building institutions that respond to those needs. So that's pretty much how, growing up in school, we've spent a lot of time there. I also got lucky and I got the opportunity to work with some leading not-for-profits during my, education. It was Asar, Pratham, Magic Bus. I've interned with all these organizations where I got a lot of hands-on exposure to development programs. Um, and it kind of helped me develop that nuanced understanding of scale, impact, and implementation, like Sachi was also mentioning. But at the same time, with the background that I came, I still feel philanthropy has to be very thoughtful, participatory, and institution building in its approach.
Wonderful. And when did the art and promotion of indigenous art and culture that you've been doing through Sabrangi and also with Arshila, is that something that also started to focus on very early on, apart from the work in Bihar, which is also focused on just rural livelihoods, education? How did that pan out?
So Takshila obviously is doing work across multiple fields. Arts is one of them. And Takshila was already building an arts collection and supporting different organizations and artists. While doing so, I was not so involved during the building of the collection and when we were supporting different organizations in this space. However, when Archila Ahmedabad, which is our first center, came up in 21, that is when I started getting involved in the art space that Takshila works in. So we decided to create our own multi-art spaces because we realized the need for people to be able to have these open spaces which they could just enter and experience art, as I said, through performances or exhibitions. And this was, I mean, all these centers are curated and programmed for all age groups. So this is when I also got involved in this space. I'm currently involved with all the centers. Archila has spaces in Ahmedabad, Shantiniketan, Goa, Delhi, Patna, and Kochi. Kochi is the most recent edition, and we are having the Students' Biennale now at our space. And Patna is also one of the recent additions to the Archila spaces with, again, trying to move to cities where there are not so many such spaces and connecting people to the arts. So this has been the more recent initiative of Takshila where I've been involved, and yeah.
Great. Great. Thanks, Sedika. Surbi, early influences
Yeah.
to giving and
Yeah,
how you think about
very
it
like
now.
origin story based question. So I think very similar to Sachi and Setika in some sense. A lot of my early influences were around volunteering and teaching. So probably the earliest memory that I have was around when I was 7 or 8 years old. My elder sister used to teach and volunteer as well. So one day, like she took me along with her, and I remember this very distinctly. I think it's still a very core memory for me because I remember I was as old as the students at that time. So I don't think I was doing much of the teaching bit, but I was observing and I was in the room. And I have like a lot of beauty spots on my face that you probably can't see right now. But I remember the kids tracing them and making shapes and naming the shapes because they were so excited. And like I was laughing with them and having a great time. And I was like, I want to come every week. So I think that's when I instantly fell in love with the idea of being around children, students, and these kind of like classroom environments, especially of underserved communities. So I have taught like in Arkepuram, but I've also taught some Hispanic kids in California. So it's been very varied experiences that way. When I finally started to specialize more than a primary school teacher, because that was my qualification for the longest time, when I was like enough of a lawyer, I also started helping in legal aid clinics. And I think I also eventually came to gender justice as a cause, which was wonderful. So that way, I think I found my calling both in teaching as well as gender justice. Um, I think for philanthropy, what I learned along the way, which is probably the takeaway, and as I grew up, was that it became very clear to me that I want to contribute in ways that feel tangible and meaningful, but also in ways that feel good, like warm altruism. So I think that balance for me was really important.
Okay, all right. I'll continue with Surbhi and Sanchi, just in context of the NextGen program, since it's designed to build clarity and conviction early on. Is there any assumption about philanthropy that the program has challenged for you? Uh, Surbhi?
I think, of course, because I think Sachi's had a lot more context and she probably didn't have that many assumptions about philanthropy since she's been in like the space for a while. I think I'm like the worst of the worst case, given how privileged I am. My idea of philanthropy until I came into the program was still this like really messed up, cliched idea of like philanthropy is an old rich person with a foundation who throws a fundraiser gala. Like that's what I thought of it until I came into the room with some of these people. I saw it as like very distant from reality. Like, is it really impacting whom it's supposed to? Is it more like from a tax perspective, from a compliance perspective, like the very cynical lawyer also kicked in. So I think those were some of the earlier assumptions that I held about it. I was also surprised that young people are interested in giving. Like at this stage in our lives, I think not being self-centered can often be hard. And seeing that was really reassuring as well.
Oh, that's a very heartening observation, Sanchi.
Yeah, that's great. So my first point is actually what Surbi mentioned. It is very heartening to see that young people are actually interested in giving, in philanthropy, and I think a lot of them just are looking for that forum to engage. And so one big takeaway for me is that if we're able to have more of these forums that get young people involved in philanthropy, show them the kinds of amazing work that's happening, we'll really get a very positive response. The second thing that I really learned from this program was traditionally, a lot of us think of philanthropy as giving money or giving your resources like that. But I think what the Next Gen has really taught me and what this Next Gen program has taught me is that there is so much more that you can give. You can give your time, you can give your skills, you can even give your network of people. And the cohort has so many wonderful examples of this. So we have a cohort member whose background is in filmmaking, and he's working with an organization of women who are domestic abuse survivors. And what he's doing is he's talking to them, he's interviewing them, he's helping them open up and spending time with them. There are two other cohort members that work with children that are developing through sports. And what they're doing is they're spending their time and taking their passion for sports and starting off a league for these students and for these kids. And so philanthropy is about so much more than just giving money, and really the impact that you can bring with even your time, whatever other skills that you can bring is so helpful to this space. And the Next Gen truly does think differently and really brings a lot of that to the table.
Just as she was talking about how you don't necessarily have to be high net worth or
Yeah.
have like a high monetary situation to be able to give back. I also realized that the space is a lot more democratized and decentralized than I gave it credit for. I viewed it as a very elite space to begin with, but even the examples that Sachi's given, for example, right, it serves to show that the community is growing every day, and that's really heartening to see as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Uh, just shifting gears a little bit and moving, to more of the gender lens and what women bring to philanthropy. Is there a different lens? Setika, if I may, ask you, increasingly we're seeing the evidence, right, that how women are shaping now, not just how much is given, but also in the way that, philanthropy is practiced and the approaches that they bring to this world. So, given your experience in this, and also, I mean, you would have seen that difference maybe perhaps in the way that, your fathers approached it to how you're doing it. Is there a, unique lens and approach that you think that women bring to philanthropy?
I think there is. I don't think there's a uniform way as such, but I feel there is a slight emphasis on empathy, and a longer term community impact, a slight focus on the lived realities. Um, I mean, I can say, especially working with women, I think there's a deeper attentiveness when it comes to invisible labor, when it comes to care work, also when it comes to understanding structural barriers that are shaping people's lives, especially women's. Um, while developing the model of livelihoods at Parivartan, it was initially the idea was to work in 8-hour shifts for the stitching and the weaving unit for women. And I remember moving around about 30 villages, meeting these women and understanding that the extent and just understanding the extent of their responsibilities at home, included children, included cooking, cleaning, cattle, so many things. And this 8-hour model just did not work. And that is when we kind of molded it into these 4 to 5 hour shifts. So they were able to balance their household chores and also come and earn a living. So I feel there's a slight emphasis on participation rather than prescription when it comes to women, and also a focus on agency and institution buildings. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Setika. Turning again back to Sanchi and Surabhi, curious to know if how the conversations in your family are evolving around philanthropy. As given that both of you are now, working in this space, and then, as part of the NextGen program, you've also had an opportunity to, engage a lot with other NPOs through both through your work and through this program. So are you seeing the conversations on philanthropy now, uh, different kinds of conversations happening around the dining table? Surbi.
I've just unmuted for fun. You can go first.
Okay, sure. Um, yeah, I think I spoke about this a little bit earlier, but now that I've seen a lot of these organizations that are embedding themselves in the government and working at scale, I think I've also spent a lot of time trying to convince my parents to be a little bit more strategic and more thoughtful about philanthropy, right? So instead of, or maybe not even instead of, but along with doing these heartfelt causes, philanthropy also gives us so much opportunity to support these organizations that are taking these big risky bets that can literally transform the country. And so something that I learned from AIP in my early days was looking at philanthropy as a portfolio. And coming from an investor mindset, I think that that's very helpful. That's a helpful way to see it. So, of course, have some part of your philanthropy that's allocated towards like these heartfelt causes and like touchy feely tangible things that you can see, but also have some part of it where your philanthropy is allocated towards causes that might not have as immediate or as tangible an impact, but when it works, it will work at a much bigger scale. So to really diversify the way that we're thinking about it, and it took a while for I think my parents to see this because they've really grown up in a very different India where I think like you see so much, you see poverty, you see hunger, and your immediate thought is how do I immediately put a band-aid on it. But there really is a way to say if I work if I work smartly, like there's a way that I can one day end these issues. And so I think we've now been focusing a lot more on strategic or thoughtful philanthropy.
Cool, I'll go next. So I think, again, because my family is also at a very nascent stage when we think about philanthropy, it's also very possibly because I'm probably the second generation that can even consider philanthropy as a cause. Like my parents are very much first gen in terms of the socioeconomic mobility happened during the course of their lifetime. So philanthropy is also a very novel idea to them, if that makes sense. That said, even though it's not been intergenerational, I'm glad the conversation started. So for us, it was very first principles. The first thing I did was ask my dad that, like, do our companies have CSR requirements? What's that like? How are we fulfilling them? So those are probably the first questions that I went into, just to understand what are we doing through what the avenues that we have already. So two of the industries that we involved in terms of our businesses are also traditionally very social welfare and rights-centric industries. So that's microfinance and healthcare, right? So I think a lot of our giving has been informal and very individual, but through these models, because like we'll help individual patient cases who can't afford treatment here and there among like all five of our family members, at least a couple of months, I'm sure. And we are empowering our female borrowers through like more formalized trainings as well in terms of how they can be, how they can set up their own businesses, for example, and other such workshops. So that is an avenue that I know of that I have only been so involved in. But I think the next kind of move for me is that we recently set up a trust as well. So I am hoping that that trust translates into something that I can leverage not only for development of my wealth, but thinking about development of my giving portfolio. So I'll hopefully be troubling Sachi and the AIP team very soon just to figure out how I can start my giving journey. So the idea is that maybe the informal bits have started happening, but formalization is around the corner.
That's wonderful to hear, Surabhi, and any time that we can be of any support whatsoever, would love to do that. One of the things that we notice is that, and especially, I mean, through the NextGen program, it's clear that, young people want to drive social change and be able to influence it. But, the challenges in the sustained engagement, that how do you just keep doing it, over a period of time and keep that engagement going in a sustained manner. What would you think, Sidika, what do you think it would take to move, more young people from, making from that, intent or the interest to long-term commitment? And I ask you because, you've been doing this, after you completed your education, came back and you decided to consciously, be in this space. So are there, any one or two things that you think can actually help?
Um, yeah, I think personally for me, I think the exposure really mattered. As I mentioned previously, working hands-on with different organizations, uh, working in the space of development, that gave me that, just kind of understanding the field of work, engaging with the community. So volunteering, internships, hands-on projects. I think that gives you that real world experience that also builds this emotional connection, which in turn builds a longer term commitment. So I think one would be that kind of exposure. I think mentorship, and I think you guys are doing a great job there, is also crucial to have that intergenerational dialogue. Um, that builds confidence in young people to see, others work. It also brings in that strategic or systemic lens as to what you like, what you don't like, when you see someone else's experience and understand their experience. So I think that kind of builds confidence. I feel, both of these things would be crucial. And I think it would help young people to have a more sustained engagement.
Yeah. Surabhi and Sachi, is there something to, do you think that, having just a network, like a peer community of, your own age group who's doing more of this and whom you can, speak to from time to time, do you think that is something that would help?
Yeah, 200%. I would say like the Next Gen program is exactly that for me. It has been a community and it has revived an interest that I was starting to lose purely by issues of bandwidth, right? So I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's reviving something like that that was so close to my heart, but I felt a constant guilt about staying away from. So, I mean, like also coming to your question about what you said about sustaining engagement among young people, I would say there should be a Next Gen program in every big city. Like that should be your guys' aim at this point, since like it does all of what Setvika mentioned, right? Like there's mentorship, there's volunteering, there's immersion, and those are probably the three pillars that any sort of sustained engagement should stand on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sanchi, anything that you'd like to add?
I think Setika and Surbi covered it, but really just having a group, the next gen does think very differently. The next gen looks at different causes and approaches things their own way. So having that group to have these conversations with, the way that we have any forums, business forums, work forums, is has just been so helpful. And again, you don't want philanthropy to be a lonely journey. And sometimes for people who are in this space as philanthropists, you're not really talking to each other, especially at a young age. And so to really learn from each other and like to get inspired from each other, I think having a platform to do so has been really helpful and has made things feel less lonely and more like a community effort.
Yeah. So, these are, I think, no conversation is complete without a fun rapid fire close to it. So, I'll get to that. One cause India can't afford to ignore in the next decades. Siddhika.
Um, I have to pick one, investing, I guess, in women's economic participation. I mean, I think this forum, it's crucial. I think it's central to India's long-term development and equity. So,
Surbi.
Yeah, more internationally, I would say climate refugees for sure, and queer rights everywhere as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sanchi.
I would say skilling. We have a very narrow window to take advantage of this demographic dividend. And so, if we don't skill our population the next 2 decades, we don't want to be a poor and an aging population. And we have so much talent, so much potential. So, really working on skilling and upskilling of the workforce.
Okay. A woman philanthropist who inspires you, Surbi.
Should have a name at the top of my tongue. Tara Bachani, I've read a lot about her lately, so I would say her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sanchi.
Yeah, Tara's my mentor and she is amazing for AIP NextGen. I would say Radha Goenka. She is so passionate about so many areas of work, and she's really someone who works on institution building so thoughtfully. So heritage, women, education. She's someone who is really going beyond that check writing to doing the research, getting involved, and doing it very thoughtfully.
Siddhika.
okay, maybe Rohini Nilekani. So, someone you've also been working with. Again, a very institution building approach, I feel, to her giving. A deeper engagement, looking at issues more systemically. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Siddhika, again, if I can start with you on one change you would like to see in Indian philanthropy.
Something we've discussed today, I think, moving towards a more long-term and trust-based funding. I
Yeah.
think that something I'd like to see.
Sanchi.
I think more rigorous measurement. It's great that philanthropists are now hopefully going to move towards longer term funding, but for that, organizations, I think, now also need to start tracking better impact metrics, tracking, deciding what they track, and having very credible data and insights here on these metrics for impact.
Surbi.
Yeah, I think again, moving from this compliance burden kind of mentality into a more intentional, more meaningful, and more cause-specific engagement as well, and sustainable, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Sanchi, if I may ask you to complete the sentence. The wealthy must start giving early because.
Because the future of our country is a shared responsibility.
Siddhika.
Because meaningful change takes time.
Surbi.
Because the ability and the responsibility always exists. It's just up to us when we decide to act on it.
Yeah, right. And wonderful. And the last one is, if philanthropy had an ad tagline, what would it be? Sanchi.
It's Nike, it's just do it. Nothing what is stopping you. Dive in as soon as you can, right? Whether it's starting off with building a perspective and giving your time before you give your money, just do it.
That's great. Surbi.
I would say the same as investing actually, because you start early, you vary your portfolio, and you know your cause.
Yeah, yeah. Setika?
Maybe beyond charity and towards change. Um, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you all three so much for your honesty and thoughtfulness. It's been a delight to have this conversation with you. And if there's, one thread that was running through, the conversation today, it was that, philanthropy does not have to wait. And it takes patience, it takes, thoughtfulness. And the earlier that you start, the exposure and the engagement, it builds the conviction, the confidence to be able to do it with both head and heart. So yeah, thank you all three again so much.